The second my stepfather realized who was sitting at the head of the negotiation table, the champagne glass in his hand shattered against the mahogany floor. I didn't flinch. I just watched the expensive liquid soak into the carpet, staining it a deep, ruinous gold. This was the man who used to force me to scrub his patio with a toothbrush, because he said I needed to learn the value of hard work. He was staring at the CEO of the investment group holding the mortgage on his entire life, and I was about to foreclose on everything. But before I tell you how I destroyed his empire, I need to tell you how he stole mine. My name is Harper. I am 32 years old, and I grew up in a small, salt-sprayed town on the coast of Maine called Bristol Cove. When people picture Maine, they think of picturesque lighthouses and lobster dinners on a pier. My reality was a bit grittier. My parents owned a small diner called the Rusty Anchor. It wasn't a tourist trap. It was where the fishermen came at 4 a.m. for coffee strong enough to strip paint and eggs that stuck to your ribs. The place smelled permanently of bacon grease, old wood, and the Atlantic Ocean. To outsiders, it probably looked run down, with its weathered shingles and neon sign that flickered when the wind blew too hard. But to us, it was a palace. We were happy. My mother, Julia, and I were a team. My father had passed away from lung cancer when I was 7, leaving us with a mountain of medical bills and a diner that barely broke even. But we made it work. I was waitressing by the time I was tall enough to see over the counter. I knew how to fix the espresso machine with a paperclip, how to balance the till, and how to charm a tip out of the grumpiest old sea captain in the county. We didn't have luxury, but we had laughter. We had Sunday nights where we'd close early, make a pizza, and dance around the kitchen to old radio hits. I thought that was all I would ever need. Then Silas Vance rolled into town. I was 15 when he walked into the Rusty Anchor. He didn't look like our usual customers. He was wearing a cashmere sweater, loafers with no socks, and a watch that cost more than our industrial oven. He was a property developer from Boston, looking for rustic charm to exploit. He told my mother she was the most authentic thing he'd found in years. Silas was slick polished, and spoke in a language of dreams and financial security that my mother, exhausted from years of 14-hour shifts, was desperate to hear. Can I blame her? She was tired. She was lonely. And here was a man promising to take the weight of the world off her shoulders. He swept her up like a rogue wave. It was fast, overwhelming, and dangerous. They were married within 5 months. I remember the day we moved into Silas's architectural masterpiece, on the cliffs overlooking the bay. It was a cold, modern house made of glass and steel. Mom kept telling me how lucky we were, how safe we would be, but I didn't feel safe. I felt like a specimen in a jar. Silas showed his true colors exactly 1 week after the honeymoon. It started with the suggestions. He told me I shouldn't wear my hair in a messy bun because it looked low class. He told me to stop speaking with the local fisherman's slang. Then it got personal. He would wrinkle his nose when I walked into a room. He told my mother that I carried the smell of the diner with me, a scent of stale grease and cheap fish that no amount of soap could wash away. He called it the scent of failure. The isolation was gradual but absolute. When he had business partners over for drinks, I was banished to my room. He said having a sullen teenager moping around would ruin the feng shui of the evening. I would sit upstairs, hungry, listening to the clinking of crystal and the low hum of expensive jazz, feeling like an intruder in my own life. The moment that seared itself into my memory happened when I was 17. Silas was hosting a launch party for his new luxury condo development. I had been instructed to stay invisible, but I needed to get a textbook from the library downstairs for a school project. I tried to sneak through the edges of the living room, but Silas saw me. He didn't ignore me. He decided to use me as a prop. He called me over, wrapping a heavy arm around my shoulders. He announced to a room full of investors that this was his charity case. His new wife's daughter who he was trying to civilize. We're trying to get the smell of the fishing nets off her, he laughed, squeezing my shoulder hard enough to bruise. But you know what they say, you can take the girl out of the trailer park, but you can't take the trailer park out of the girl. The room erupted in polite, cruel laughter. My mother stood in the corner, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres, looking down at her shoes. She didn't say a word. That silence hurt more than Silas's insults. I stood there, burning with shame, while Silas patted my head like I was a stray dog he had reluctantly allowed inside. That night, I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the ocean, and I made a vow. One day, I would buy and sell men like Silas Vance. I didn't know how, but I knew I would do it. Because girls from the trailer park know how to survive. We know how to grit our teeth and wait for the tide to turn. Before I tell you about the betrayal that finally pushed me out the door, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel, and I'd love to hear in the comments if you've ever had to deal with a toxic family member. Now let's get back to the nightmare. As I approached graduation, Silas's psychological warfare shifted to my future. He told my mother there was no point in saving for a university education for me. He said I wasn't academic material, and that I should probably just look for a husband or go back to waitressing. Every time I brought up college, he would scoff. Why waste the money, Harper? You'll just drop out and get pregnant. It's in your genetics. I ignored him. I applied to the state university and got in. I didn't get a full ride, but I got enough financial aid to make it possible if I worked. I took a job at a library and another at a coffee shop. I studied until my eyes blurred. I was determined to prove him wrong. But the real blow came when I was 22, just before my final semester. I had come home for Christmas, a tradition I dreaded but maintained for my mother's sake. She looked thinner, more fragile. Her spark was gone, replaced by a nervous flutter every time Silas entered the room. While Silas was out playing golf, Mom asked me to find a tax document in his office. I started looking through his filing cabinet and found a folder labeled The Rusty Anchor Sale. My heart stopped. When my mother married Silas, she had sold the diner. The proceeds, about $250,000, were supposed to be put into a trust for her retirement and my future. That was the deal. I opened the folder and found the bank transfer records. The money hadn't gone into a trust. It had been transferred directly into Silas's personal account, and from there into a series of high-risk gambling debts and payments for a luxury, yet he claimed was a business expense. The money was gone. All of it. My father's legacy, the sweat and tears of my parents' life, had been burned on poker games and fiberglass boats. I waited for Silas to come home. I confronted him in the kitchen, tossing the papers onto the marble island. I expected him to panic. I expected him to lie. Instead, he just poured himself a glass of wine and smirked. "You should be thanking me," he said, swirling the red liquid. "I put a roof over your head. I fed you. That money was my payment for dealing with the burden of you and your mother." I told him I was going to tell Mom. I told him I was going to the police. Silas set his glass down and his eyes went dead cold. He took a step toward me. "You say one word to your mother," he whispered, "and I divorce her. I kick her out. The prenup is ironclad. She gets nothing. No house, no alimony, no savings. She has a heart condition, Harper. Do you think she can survive on the street? Do you think she can go back to scrubbing tables at her age? If you tell her, you are the one killing her." He leaned in close, smelling of expensive cologne and rot. "What are you going to do, Fisher girl? You have no money. You have no power. You are nothing." I left that night. I didn't say goodbye to my mother because I knew I would break if I looked at her. I packed my duffel bag and drove my beat-up sedan to Boston. I swore I wouldn't return until I had the power to crush him. The next 10 years were a blur of caffeine and ambition. I started as an administrative assistant at a commercial real estate firm specializing in distressed assets. I was the girl who fetched the bagels and organized the files. But I was also the girl who stayed until midnight reading the contracts. I learned how leverage worked. I learned how to spot a weak foundation in a balance sheet. I learned that arrogant men often leave paper trails because they think no one is smart enough to check. I worked my way up. Associate. Manager. VP. My background, the grit, the ability to read people, the hunger, made me dangerous in the boardroom. While the Ivy League boys were worried about their golf handicaps, I was worried about the bottom line. By the time I was 30, I had started my own boutique firm, Iron Coast Capital. My partner, Liam, was a brilliant analyst who hated the toxicity of big corporate firms. We specialized in one thing: buying the debt of failing development companies and restructuring them. We were the vultures that circled when the lions got too old and slow. And Silas Vance was getting very slow. I had kept tabs on him. His company, Vance Development, was bleeding money. He had leveraged everything to build a massive luxury resort called the Pinnacle on the coast. But the market had shifted. People didn't want overpriced, sterile condos anymore. Construction was stalled. Creditors were circling. Silas was desperate. When the proposal hit my desk, I actually laughed out loud. Vance Development was seeking a $5 million injection of capital to stave off bankruptcy. He was shopping the deal around Boston, looking for a savior. He didn't know Iron Coast Capital was my firm. We operated under a generic holding company name for privacy. I did my due diligence. It was worse than I thought. Silas hadn't just made bad business decisions. He was committing fraud. He was using construction loans to pay off personal debts. He was creating fake contractors to siphon money. And I discovered he had a personal assistant, named Veronica, who was receiving a salary of $80,000 a year for a job that didn't seem to exist. He was cheating on my mother, stealing from his investors, and driving the company off a cliff. He was asking for $5 million. I decided to give it to him. My partner Liam thought I was crazy. "The numbers are garbage, Harper," he said. "Why catch a falling knife?" "Because," I told him, looking at the photo of my father I kept on my desk, "this knife has my name on it." We structured the deal carefully. We bought his debt. We became his primary creditor. Over the course of 18 months, Iron Coast Capital quietly acquired 65% of the debt obligations of Vance Development. We owned him. He just didn't know it yet. I also reconnected with my mother. Slowly. Careful phone calls. I told her I was doing well, that I was safe. She sounded so small on the phone. She told me Silas was stressed, that money was tight, that he was angrier than usual. She was walking on eggshells every day. I told her to hang on. I told her I was working on a solution. The trap was finally set for a rainy Tuesday in November. Silas had called for an emergency meeting with his mystery investors to renegotiate the terms of the loan. He wanted more time. He wanted better rates. He thought he was coming to charm a group of faceless bankers. I rented a conference room in one of the most expensive high-rises in Boston. I wanted him to feel small. I hired security. And crucially, I invited my mother. I told her I was in town and wanted to meet her for lunch at the building, but I needed her to come up to the conference room first. I also sent an anonymous invitation to Veronica, the mistress, suggesting that if she wanted to protect her financial interests, she should attend this meeting. The stage was set. 10 years of anger, focused into a single point. I arrived early, wearing a tailored black suit that cost more than the car I drove when I left home. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, facing the door, with my back to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Liam sat to my right. My mother arrived first. She looked confused, clutching her purse. When she saw me, her eyes widened. "Harper, what are you doing here? This is Silas's business meeting." "Trust me, Mom," I said, standing up to hug her. She felt frail. "Just sit down. You need to see this." Then Veronica arrived. She was young, blonde, and looked annoyed. She froze when she saw my mother, but took a seat at the far end of the table, clearly unsure of the dynamic. Finally, the doors opened, and Silas Vance walked in. He looked older. His hair was thinning, and his face was puffy from too much wine and too much stress. But he still had that arrogant swagger. He walked in talking to his lawyer, laughing about how he was going to wrap these investors around his finger. He was holding a glass of champagne he had apparently grabbed from the reception cart in the hallway. He looked at the table. He saw Veronica. He saw my mother. He stopped, confused. Then he looked at the head of the table. He looked at me. At first, he didn't recognize me. It had been a decade. I wasn't the scrawny girl in thrift store clothes anymore. I was a woman in power. But then he saw the eyes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale, then red, then a ghostly white. His hand went slack. Crash. The champagne glass hit the floor. The sound echoed in the silent room. "Harper," he whispered. It came out as a choke. "What? What are you doing in my chair?" I think you're confused, Silas, I said, my voice steady and cold. This isn't your chair. This is the creditor's chair. I am Iron Coast Capital. I own 65% of your debt. I own the mortgage on your office. I own the lien on the house. Essentially, Silas, I own you. He tried to laugh, but it sounded like a dry cough. This is a joke. Julia, did you put her up to this? He looked at my mother, who was staring at me in shock. Sit down, Silas, I commanded. And for the first time in his life, he listened to me. He sank into a chair, looking like a deflated balloon. I opened the dossier in front of me. Let's review the situation. Your development, the pinnacle, is 2 years behind schedule. You are currently defaulting on 3 major loans. And according to my forensic audit of your books, I slid a stack of papers down the table toward him. You have embezzled approximately $1.2 million for personal expenses. That's a lie, he sputtered. Those were business expenses. Networking. Is Veronica a networking expense? I asked, gesturing to the woman at the end of the table. My mother gasped. She turned to look at Veronica, then back at Silas. The betrayal in her eyes was heartbreaking, but it was also the spark of something else. Rage. I have the credit card statements, Silas. I continued. Tiffany bracelets. Weekend trips to Aruba. A leased Porsche. All paid for with company funds. All while you told my mother you were broke. All while you gambled away her inheritance. I turned to my mother. Mom, remember the money from the Rusty Anchor? The money he said was in a trust? He spent it. Years ago. On gambling and boats. He stole everything from you. Silas stood up, slamming his hands on the table. You ungrateful little brat. I took you in. I fed you. You have no right. I have every right. I stood up, and my voice didn't shake. I am the majority stakeholder. And as of this morning, I am calling in the debt. Iron Coast Capital is exercising its right to foreclose on Vance Development immediately. We are seizing the assets. The company is finished. You can't do that, he hissed. I'll sue you. I'll drag this out for years. You can try, Liam interjected calmly. But we've already forwarded the evidence of embezzlement and fraud to the district attorney. I imagine you'll be too busy with your criminal defense to worry about civil suits. Silas looked around the room like a trapped animal. He looked at Veronica, who was already gathering her bag to leave. He looked at the lawyer, who was staring at the floor, distancing himself. Then he looked at my mother. Julia, he pleaded, switching to his charming voice, though it cracked with desperation. Julia, honey, you know she's lying. She's always been jealous of us. She's trying to ruin our happiness. Tell her to stop. My mother stood up slowly. She picked up the glass of water in front of her. She walked over to where Silas was sitting. He looked up, expecting comfort. She threw the water right in his face. I want a divorce, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was made of steel. And I want you out of my house by tonight. It's my house. Silas screamed, wiping water from his eyes. Actually, I interrupted. It's the bank's house now. But I'm acquiring it as part of the asset seizure. And I'm letting Mom live there as long as she wants. You, however, are trespassing. I nodded to the security guards by the door. Please escort Mr. Vance out of the building. And make sure he doesn't take any company property. Not even a stapler. Silas started shouting as the guards grabbed his arms. He screamed that I was a fraud, that I was nothing, that I smelled like fish. I leaned in close as they dragged him past me. You're right, Silas. I do smell like fish. I smell like hard work. I smell like the ocean. And now I smell like success. The door closed, silencing his screams. The room was quiet. Veronica had slipped out during the chaos. It was just me and my mother. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. Then she crumbled. I caught her before she hit the floor. We sat on the expensive carpet of that conference room, and she cried into my shoulder. She apologized over and over again. She apologized for not protecting me, for believing him, for being weak. I told her it was okay. I told her it was over. The aftermath was brutal but satisfying. Silas Vance was indicted for fraud and embezzlement. It turns out I wasn't the only one he had stolen from. He avoided jail time by taking a plea deal that left him with a felony record and absolutely zero assets. He lost the cars, the watches, the reputation. My mother's divorce was finalized 6 months later. Since Silas had no assets left, she didn't get much from him, but she got her freedom. I bought the house on the cliff from my own company, sold it for a profit, and used the money to buy something much better. I bought back the building where the rusty anchor used to be. It had been turned into a failing souvenir shop, but the bones were still there. I handed the deed to my mother. Do whatever you want with it, I said. Open a diner. Paint it pink. Burn it down. It's yours. She didn't open a diner. She turned it into an art studio and gallery for local artists. She spends her days painting seascapes and drinking coffee that isn't made by a machine. She's happier than I've ever seen her. She met a nice man, a retired lobsterman named Ben, who treats her like a queen and thinks her paint-stained hands are beautiful. As for Silas, I saw him a few months ago. I was back in town visiting Mom. I called an Uber to take me to the airport. When the car pulled up, I saw the driver's face in the rearview mirror. It was Silas. He looked old, defeated. He was wearing a cheap polyester shirt that was fraying at the collar. He saw me in the mirror. His eyes met mine. There was no anger left in them, just shame. He didn't say a word. He just drove. When we got to the airport, the fare was $24.50. I handed him a $100 bill. Keep the change, I said. Buy yourself some soap. I walked into the terminal and didn't look back. Revenge isn't about anger. It's not about hate. It's about balance. It's about taking the broken pieces of your life and building a fortress that no one can ever knock down again. Silas Vance taught me that the world is cruel, but he forgot to teach me to be afraid. He thought he was crushing a bug, but he was just forging steel. And in the end, he built the very weapon that destroyed him. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more. And remember, the best revenge is living well, and maybe owning the bank that holds your enemy's mortgage. Thanks for watching.